Hello and welcome to the My School channel. My name is Angela, and in this video we're going to continue with government topic by topic video lesson. We started with the forms of government, and now we're moving on to the second part of the video where we're going to continue with the forms of government, and we're going to begin with feudalism. So please stay with us, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the My School channel. Like I said earlier, we're going to continue with the forms of government. So let's begin with feudalism. Feudalism is a social, economic, and political system characterized by a hierarchical structure of land ownership, vassalage, and obligations between lords, which are landowners, and peasants, which are serfs. So in feudalism, land is the main commodity, and the amount of land you own determines your place in the society. So this is the hierarchical structure for a feudal system of government. At the top of this hierarchical structure is the monarch, the king or the queen, who offers land to the nobility. Those are members of society that hold certain titles in the society. So the monarch offers land to the nobility. The nobility also offers land to those underneath them, which are the knights and the vassals. The knights and the vassals pay respect to the noble men and women. They also offer loyalty, protection, and military service to them. So the knights and the vassals in turn offer land and protection to those that are underneath them. Those are the merchants, the farmers, the craftsmen, and under them are the peasants and the serfs. So all of these are protected by the knights and the vassals, and in turn, these people offer foods and services to the knights. So this is the hierarchical structure for a feudal system of government. So the system of feudalism emerged in medieval Europe from 11th to the 13th century. Monarchs or kings occupy the highest position in the feudal hierarchy, possessing supreme power over the land. Beneath them resided nobles, lords, and vassals who owned extensive estates or fiefs. So another name for land is fiefs. At the lowest tier were peasants and serfs who were bound to the land and responsible for its cultivation. So they worked the land and they stayed there. And in turn, those people above them offered them protection. So now let's move on to the next slide, where we're going to discuss the features of feudalism. One of the features is that the system was based on a hierarchical structure of vassalage, where lower-ranking lords or vassals pledge loyalty and military service to their higher-ranking lords in exchange for land. So there is a hierarchical structure, like I said earlier. So feudalism was characterized by a decentralized structure of governance, with local lords having significant autonomy over territories. So the king and the queen did not have significant power and authority over those under them. So the people who were responsible for decision-making in a feudal system were the local lords. So they were the ones that made decisions about how the serfs, the merchants, the farmers, and the rest of them should behave in the society. The king and queen are only responsible for the land that they provide to those under them, and in turn, those under them offer them food, protection, military service, and the rest. Alright, and that feature of feudalism is that peasants, often referred to as serfs, were bound to the land and obligated to provide labor and a share of their produce to the lord. They have limited mobility and were subject to the lord's jurisdiction. So they till the land and they stay there. They don't have the resources necessary to move to other places within the fiefdom. So they stayed there and they were subject to the lord's laws and regulations. And that feature of feudalism is land known as fief was granted by higher ranking lords to vassals in exchange for loyalty, military service, or other service. This was already explained earlier. And that feature is that if a vassal died without heirs, his property is reverted back to the lord. So if a vassal dies, it's reverted back to the person above him. It doesn't go to someone else, just to the person above him. So now let's move on to the merits of feudalism. One of the merits of feudalism is order and personal loyalty. Feudalism at the time provided some form of order and avoided total chaos by bringing together strong sentiments of personal loyalty connected with possession of land. So in those days, there was no real government in the society, and this was kind of like a form of government for them. It helped to prevent total chaos from reigning over the land, and there was some form of personal loyalty to the person above you. So it helped to create order within the society. Another merit of feudalism is local autonomy. Feudalism provided a degree of local autonomy, allowing regions to govern themselves under the authority of the local lords. Like I said earlier, the system of governance during that time was decentralized. So the power rested in the local lords who created laws and regulations that the lower members of the society have to be obedient to. So the king and queen don't necessarily offer laws to these various jurisdictions. It's the local laws that are responsible for that. So this is a merit of feudalism because it granted autonomy to different jurisdictions rather than having a centralized authority. And that merit of feudalism is self-reliance. It fostered among the big landlords self-reliance and love of personal independence. So these local lords had independence. They could do whatever they want to do within their land, and there was no higher authority to question them. And that merit is the spirit of liberty. Feudalism succeeded in keeping alive the spirit of liberty in medieval Europe. Again, there is independence. The king and the queen did not have authority to give them laws that they have to abide by. It is the local laws that created laws for themselves within their jurisdiction. Now let's move on to the demerits of feudalism. One of the demerits is inequality. Feudalism was marked by a rigid social hierarchy, leading to significant social and economic inequalities. The nobility enjoyed privileges, while peasants often faced hardship. So it was very difficult for the peasants to rise above their social class, and there was a lot of inequality. The local lords continued to own their land, while those underneath them had to continue to till the ground in exchange for protection from the lords. So there is some form of social inequality. And that demerit is limited social mobility. So individuals are now afforded the opportunity to move up the social hierarchy, with individuals typically born into their social class and having limited opportunities for advancement. Like I said, they can't move out of this land that they were born into. They have to continue tilling the land in order to get protection from their lord. So as a result of that, there's limited social mobility. You can't move higher above the social hierarchy. And that demerit of feudalism is instability. The system's reliance on personal relationship and obligation sometimes led to conflict and instability, especially during periods of weak central authority. Since there's no weak central authority and anybody can do what they choose to do, sometimes people can choose not to be loyal. And in spite of getting favor from someone higher above, you may choose to pay that favor with something bad. And as a result of that, it can lead to instability within the society. And that demerit of feudalism is social exploitation. The serfs, those people beneath the social structure, they faced exploitation as they were required to provide labor and resources to the lord in exchange for protection and the right to work the land. So they were being exploited and they can't rise above that, so they have to continue doing that till they die. So that's the demerits of feudalism. Now let's move on to the next slide where we're going to be discussing a model example of feudalism. So a model example is European societies between the 9th and the 15th century. So in Europe, feudalism was practiced. The feudal system in medieval Europe was based on land ownership and loyalty with kings, granting lands or fiefs to lords in exchange for military service and loyalty. So that is the characteristics of the feudal structure in European society in medieval Europe. Lords, also known as nobles or vassals, held lands granted by the king and were responsible for governing their territories. Again, they had the power, the authority to create laws within their jurisdiction, and those above them do not have to question their authority. Below the lords were knights, who served as warriors and protectors of the lord's land, often receiving their own parcel of land, known as manors, in exchange for service. So these knights were under the lord's authority, and so they offered protection to the land, and in exchange, they got a parcel of land, a manor. Peasants, also called serfs or villeins, formed the majority of the population and worked the land owned by the lords in exchange for protection and a portion of their crops. So, majority of the population are actually peasants or serfs, and they work for the lords and the knights who are above them. So now let's move on to another form of government, which is gerontocracy. Gerontocracy refers to a political system where the elderly hold a disproportionate share of power and influence. So it is a system of government where the old rules the land. So in the gerontocratic system, decision-making and leadership are typically dominated by older individuals, often to the exclusion of the younger generation. So the term is derived from the Greek words geron, which means old man, and kratos, which means rule or power. So now let's move on to the next slide where we'll discuss the features of gerontocracy. One of the features is that political power is concentrated in the hands of older individuals who may hold key positions of authority and influence. So it's older individuals who hold key positions of authority within that system. Gerontocracies often place a cultural emphasis on the wisdom, experience, and seniority of older individuals. So they are more focused on wisdom and experience rather than innovation and about the younger generation. And that feature of gerontocracy is that the system may resist or be slow to embrace social, political, or economic changes, as older leaders may be conservative in their outlook. To be conservative means that you like to retain or to stick to customs and traditions. And when you do that, you do not embrace new things, new technologies, new ideas. And as a result of that, it might be very slow or resistant to change. And that feature of gerontocracy is younger generations may face challenges in obtaining leadership or influencing decision-making processes. Since most of the political offices are held by older individuals, the younger generations are not allowed to do anything or to influence any decision-making process within the country. So now let's move on to the merits of gerontocracy. One of the merits of gerontocracy is experience and wisdom. So proponents argue that gerontocracy allows for the leadership of individuals with extensive life experience and wisdom. This contributes to better decision-making. So with more experience and wisdom, the decision-making process within the country will be better. Another merit of gerontocracy is stability. The emphasis on seniority may lead to a more stable political environment, as leaders may be perceived as less impulsive or prone to radical changes. Remember, I said earlier that they are more conservative in nature. They like to stick to customs and traditions, and with that, there is stability in the society. Another merit of gerontocracy is customs and traditions. The older generation commonly lay emphasis on obedience to tried and tested ways of doing things, and this can provide safety within the system. So this is why most of us like to stick to customs and traditions, because it has been tried and tested, and it makes things more secure. It creates some form of comfort in the minds of members of the society. And that merit of gerontocracy is guidance based on historical context. So historical perspective can be valuable in decision making. This allows leaders to draw on past experiences to navigate current issues, and this may contribute to a more nuanced and informed approach to governance. Since these older individuals have seen a lot of things during their time in the world, it will be easier to make decisions based on the way things happened in the past. If things turned out well, they make decisions based on that. If things didn't turn out well, they try to avoid that. And with that, there is some form of nuanced and informed approach to governance. Now let's move on to the demerits of gerontocracy. One of the demerits is limited innovation. So in a gerontocratic system, they may be less adaptive to new ideas and innovations, as older leaders may be less inclined to embrace change. Like I said earlier, they tend to be conservative in nature, and with that, they can be resistant to change. And that demerit is generational differences. The younger generations may feel marginalized or excluded from the decision-making process, and this leads to generational disparities and potential social tension. The young will try to speak out, and this can lead to chaos in the society. And that demerit of gerontocracy is the risk of stagnation. A resistance to change may result in stagnation and inability to address evolving challenges or respond to the needs of a dynamic society. So when you are resistant to new ideas, to new innovations, you continue to stay in the same place. Even when the world is moving past you, you keep staying there. So that's one of the demerits of gerontocracy. And that demerit is potential for authoritarianism. Concentrated power in the hands of a select group, especially if unchecked, may lead to authoritarian tendencies and a lack of accountability. So this is what is good about a democratic society. We have a combination of everybody. So without that, there is a risk for authoritarianism. So now let's move on to another form of government, which is military dictatorship. A military dictatorship is a form of government where political power is concentrated in the hands of the military or a military leader. So in such a system, the military is in charge. The military plays a dominant role in governing the country, often taking control through a coup d'etat or other forceful means. I'm sure we are aware of this because it happened in Nigerian history, where military leaders took power over from the civilian leaders through a coup d'etat. Military dictatorships are characterized by the direct involvement of the armed forces in political decision-making and the suppression of civilian governance. So it's characterized by the direct involvement of the armed forces, members of the armed forces who come to take over power from civilian leadership. Let's move on to the next slide where we'll discuss the features of military dictatorship. First of all, the military, often led by a high-ranking officer, takes direct control of the government and sidelines civilian authorities. So this is what happens, first of all, in a military dictatorship. They have to overthrow civilian governments. And that feature is that civil liberties and democratic rights may be suspended or restricted as the military consolidates power. This means that the constitution has been dethroned and now the civil liberties and rights are no longer respected by this new leadership. Another feature of military dictatorship is that military dictatorships frequently come to power through a coup d'etat, and that overthrows the existing civilian governments. And that feature is that political opposition is often suppressed through censorship, arrest, and intimidation to maintain control. This is another feature that is similar to autocracy. So there is censorship, the media is being censored, they arrest and intimidate those who try to present dissenting viewpoints from that of the military leaders. Civilian participation in governance is minimized or eliminated, with military leaders often assuming both executive and legislative roles. So when a military leader comes into power, it brings other military personnel to assume executive and legislative roles, and as a result, no civilian is allowed to make decisions within the country. So now let's move on to the merits of military dictatorship. One of the merits is stability. Military dictatorship can bring about short-term stability, especially in situations of political unrest or turmoil. With the fact that they are able to make decisions without the long processes that take place in a democratic society, there will be a lot of stability within the country, especially during times of crisis. Another merit of military dictatorship is efficient decision-making. The centralized nature of military rule may lead to swift and decisive decision-making. Again, with a democratic society, you have to make sure there is a consensus before a decision can be made. But with a military dictatorship, with just a centralized authority, a decision can be made very quickly. And that merit is national security. The military leaders may argue that their role is necessary for national security and the protection of the state from internal and external threats. Since they have the instruments of violence necessary to maintain order within the society, there is the belief that with military dictatorship, there is national security. And that merit of military dictatorship is the emphasis on order and discipline. Military dictatorship often highlights the importance of discipline and order in the society. Everybody has to respect the laws that are given to them, and they have to behave in the proper manner. So now let's move on to the demerits of military dictatorship. One is authoritarianism. Military dictatorships often lead to authoritarian rule, and this limits individual freedom, civil liberties, and political pluralism. When I'm talking about political pluralism, I mean that you are not allowed to have political parties, more than one political party within a particular state. And with a military dictatorship, no political party is allowed within the state. Individual rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, all of these things are limited in a military dictatorship. Another demerit is human rights abuses. So military regimes may be associated with human rights abuses, including the suppression of dissent, torture, and extrajudicial killing. When we talk about suppression of dissent, we mean that people who have dissent in different viewpoints from that of the military leaders will be suppressed, will not be allowed to have their say. They can be tortured and they can be extrajudicial killings. That's killing outside of the authority of the judiciary. And that demerit of military dictatorship is the lack of accountability. So these military leaders may operate with limited accountability because it's not a democratic system where they have to answer to the people. And as a result of that, there can be a lot of corruption, nepotism, and the misuse of state resources. And that demerit is the international isolation that comes along with it. So military dictatorships are usually not accepted by members of the international community because of their human rights abuses and the lack of democratic governance. And as a result of that, they may not be allowed to trade with other countries or to associate with other countries. This can lead them to be isolated. So this is another demerit of military dictatorship. Let's move on to model examples of military dictatorship. Nigeria is a model example. So between 1966 and 1978 and between 1983 and 1999, we were under military dictatorship in Nigeria. So this military dictatorship was characterized by the rule of military officers who seized power through coup d'etat. So these military leaders came into power by seizing power from the civilian government. Also, military dictatorship in Nigeria were marked by the suspension of democratic institutions and the imposition of martial law. So in Nigeria, during the military era, civilian governments were dethroned, the constitution was suspended, and the military took over power from the civilian government. They imposed their own laws, their decrees on the people. So the first military coup in Nigeria occurred in 1966, leading to a series of military regimes that alternated with brief periods of civilian rule. So the period between 1978 and 83 was the period where there was civilian rule until someone came again to take power over. Military dictators in Nigeria such as General Yakubu Gowon, General Ibrahim Babangida and General Sani Abacha wielded considerable power and control over the country. Again, they've taken power from the civilian government, and so they had the power to make and enforce laws in the society. Transition to civilian rule occurred in 1999 with the election of Olusegun Obasanjo as president, marking the end of military rule and the restoration of democratic governance in Nigeria. So since 1999, we've had democracy in Nigeria, and this system has continued to evolve over time. So we've come to the end of the first segment of this video lesson. If you would like to continue on this journey with us, please click the link in the description below. This takes you to my school website, where you can subscribe for the government topic by topic video lesson. So in the full video, we're going to continue discussing the forms of government. We're going to discuss forms like monarchy, oligarchy, and the rest of them. So please subscribe and continue on this journey with us. I believe you've enjoyed this content. If yes, please do not forget to hit the like button, click on the subscribe button, and lastly, tap on the notification bell to get informed as soon as we release the next videos.